Lucy Fisher, I will begin with you. I mean, very important first meeting at Prime Minister's Questions today. These men are going to get to know each other very well. They're going to spend a lot of the week thinking about the other man. How do you think it went?
Well, despite what I was expecting, which was quite a low-key encounter, I really thought Rishi Sunak played a blinder. He really reminded me of David Cameron. So sort of slick was his sort of presentational style. And I was impressed that he was clearly well briefed, well prepared. He and his team had obviously anticipated all the questions that Keir Starmer had asked, but he was also quite dexterous. He managed to somehow flip the questions that Keir Starmer, or the points that Keir Starmer made, back at him. So take the issue of the mandate. I think that's one of Labour's strongest attack lines at the moment. You know, what mandate does Rishi Sunak have as the third Prime Minister in less than 50 days? Going to be very difficult, really, for him to put forward a legislative agenda that's that close to the 2019 manifesto. But when Keir Starmer raised that and said, what mandate do you had? Rishi Sunak said, well, look, we're the ones that won a democratic election. You're the politician who tried to overturn the will of the people by blocking Brexit. Then when Keir Starmer brought up that video clip about when Rishi Sunak had slightly made a gaffe and said he wanted to move money away from deprived urban areas, Rishi Sunak hit back, well, you spend all your time in North London. You're the one obsessed with, urban areas. I want to put money in rural deprived areas. So he just had that agility that impressed me. And he didn't, he was dealing with quite a tough hand on the economy. The questions about Suella Braverman, I did think were tough for him, but he did his best to sort of minimise what she did as an error of judgment, something she'd owned up to, been accountable for. So I think I'd buy stock in Rishi Sunak based on his performance today.
It's interesting because as somebody who spent a vast amount of my life preparing leaders for very bruising encounters with David Cameron across the dispatch box at PMQs, I do know what you mean. I felt that he was very well rehearsed in what's known as the rejoinders, thinking of the attack lines that people are going to give to you and you have to prepare a comeback. I actually felt I could sort of feel the hand of a George Osborne in there. I wonder if George Osborne was actually helping him. I think Oliver Dowden was. It's interesting because I very much agree with your assessments, and both men, they're very successful. They're, the golden boys of finance and law in their own rights, but they're not great showmen. They're not particularly into, gratuitous insults against people. They're not particularly into jokes either. Lucy, do you think we will have a Prime Minister's Questions where, dare I say, everybody says, let's end Punch and Judy politics. I actually wrote a book on that. But do you think there will be a kind of an opportunity for them to maybe take down the temperature and get into the policy debate a bit more rather than the personal insults?
Yeah, I'll be interested to see. I expect Rishi Sunak, he is polite. I thought it was an elegant start today, the way that Keir Starmer paid tribute to him being the first British Asian Prime Minister, and how he also responded in time, welcoming what he called, a kind and very generous reception. And as you say, calling for a more grown-up sort of kind of politics, less of the gladiatorial showdown that we know and love. My sense is that Sunak understands the importance of optics and communications more than Keir Starmer. I also don't feel he's reached a ceiling yet. I think he could get better, whereas I do think Keir Starmer has probably reached a ceiling. He hasn't shown that much improvement. So as to your question, will we see an end to the jokes? I don't think so, because I think that there is a sort of sass factor there. I think they do have currency on social media. So I think we can have a little bit of that from Rishi Sunak, would be my guess.
Arthi, let's bring you in here, because the other big news that happened today was this pushing back of this fiscal statement moving from Halloween, now the 17th of November. What has the reactions been from the markets to this?
So we've had a bit of a negative reaction. So gilt yields have gone up, which means investors have taken their money out of UK government bonds. And the reason is that the moving of the fiscal statement back to mid-November effectively means that investors and the Bank of England won't really be able to create inflation forecasts that have any bearing on what's actually going to happen in terms of policy for a while now. So we're looking at what the Bank of England expects inflation to hit from 6 months and onwards, but we don't know what the energy price guarantee is going to look like at that point. It's likely to be limited support, but we don't know what impact that's going to have on inflation. So it has complicated things a little bit, and we see that in the increase in the gilt yields across both the short term and the longer term.
And I mean, politically, you can understand why he's wanted to just give himself a bit more breathing space. But do you think that, this kind of the fact that the markets are unhappy about it, should he be worried about that?
I don't think it's too significant because gilt yields, I looked just before we came on, about 3.63% on 10-year. That's up from 3.5 just before the mini budget. So it's nothing like the levels that we were seeing during the worst of the turbulence. So I think that it's something that Rishi Sunak probably thinks when they do get some certainty, it will come right back down. So I don't think it's a significant issue. And I imagine they would have thought that the payoff is worth it if they get more time to build up this budget.
And it looks like, Arthi, that mortgage rates have climbed down a wee bit today. Is that, again, a more sign of a positive reaction, of a sign that things are maybe stabilising?
So there are a few things going on today, and one of the impacts on markets is Canada's central bank. They've increased interest rates by less than expected, and so that's had an effect on the dollar. It's weakened expectations for interest rate rises across the board, including in the UK. So I suspect that that is the bigger driver on mortgage rates at the moment, and the expectation that higher interest rates, that we'll see a bigger jump, that's falling a little bit. So I think that's probably what's driving that down.
So that can bring maybe some comfort to people thinking maybe, I mean, is it too much for us, Arthi, to read into that maybe things are sort of calming down around the world?
I think it's maybe a little bit too soon because there's nothing stopping the Federal Reserve next week from increasing by another 75 basis points the way they have done for the last 3 rate rises. So I think it's still a little bit all up in the air. But I think for now, definitely things are more stable than they were.